So, I'm a writer. I'm not a speech maker. So, I wrote down exactly what I wanted to say to you guys today. Pages and pages of it. So, you'll hear me read more than speak, but it's going to help me say what I want to say. So, my name is Dilshad. Good morning, nice to meet you. So the symbolism of standing before you today on the 28th fasting day of Ramadan, talking to you about how the simple act of telling stories and sharing truths about our family's autism living has helped to destigmatize, in a small way, how Muslims with autism and other disabilities are living and perceived in our community is not lost on me. Because it was a particularly vulnerable decision I made to share a particularly vulnerable story on August 4th of 2011 that set the stage for years of storytelling that continues today. And I'm going to read that story to you. So now the post that I wrote was raw and not particularly flattering. And in it I shared some intimate details that I have since regretted. And that's something I want to make clear. Storytelling about disability living when the primary person living with the disability is not you is a very delicate matter. No one can tell someone else's story but that person. And while my son Danish, who is now nearly 18, is nonverbal and profoundly affected by his autism, he is by no means not non-communicative. He definitely has things to say, and he gets his point across to me in a variety of ways. So one of the first things I want to convey is that I struggle with this, because our family story and my story is inexplicably tied up with his story. And I can convey things, but I cannot speak for him or fully convey what that story is for him. So what I am, at best, is a ghostwriter. And in doing this work, for now going on 7 years, I've witnessed some extraordinary things happen publicly and personally from the ghostwriting. So storytelling is one of the most ancient forms of community building and bridging of humanity that we have. Whether we share stories in an oral or written tradition, the power and impact of this simple yet profound act is something we can never underestimate. Indeed, sitting in this room at tables with each other or in small rooms for intimate presentations and workshops, we start by asking each other questions and having discussions that inevitably turn into the sharing of stories and this discovery of commonalities and differences and shared experiences. So if there's one thing I wish to convey here to you today, as I will share some of our stories with you and what has grown from this experience, as I explain a little bit of the disability landscape as it pertains to American Muslim communities, it is this: from the intimate one-to-one interactions we have to the sharing of stories on larger public platforms, I've yet to see any more powerful way to start the journey to affecting positive change. Or at the very least, promote a sort of real and meaningful awareness that becomes the foundational building blocks of that change we are all seeking to bring in our faith and secular communities, in our homes and houses of worship, in our ministries, and most importantly, the hearts of our homes. So back to that first post I wrote 7 years ago. It was Ramadan like it is now, and it was a very difficult time where my children were respectively ages 10, 7, and 3. And I was barely finding any balance between fasting and trying to elevate my worship of God while balancing the act of family living and helping support my son. So there came a breaking point, and this is what I wrote. And I apologize for what may be triggering, but I wish to be honest in where I was back then. This is written on August 4th, 2011, or published on August 4th, 2011. It became the segue, for better or for worse, for everything that has since followed. I look at the clock, and it read 6:30 p.m. Danish should be home any minute now, I thought to myself. And I moved to the stove to turn off the burner under the halim that I was making for iftar, which is our fast-breaking meal, and went to get his dinner ready. Because when Danish returns from his CBI, or community-based instruction, outing with his therapist, he's usually starving, and if I don't have dinner ready, I am risking a meltdown. I heard him before the doorbell rang, wailing in a way that cuts through my body, causing my ears to ring. I open the door and he comes in, eyes all puffed up from crying and rubbing, wailing into a crescendo until he threw himself on the floor. And before I can say a word, his therapist helped him to go upstairs to his room. He knows that when Danish is upset like this, I encourage him to go to his room where it is safest for him, to help find his calm, and also so that his younger brother and sister don't have to see him in that state, and so that I can maintain good relationships between the siblings. I followed them to his room where Danish got in bed and buried himself under the covers. The therapist told me that the meltdown started in the checkout line at Walmart, where most meltdowns tend to start. For everybody, not even if you have a disability. Which they often tend to visit to work on shopping skills and social programs. In the parking lot on the way to the car, he flopped on the ground and engaged in some SIBs, which, if you know, are self-injurious behavior. With that information, I knew this wasn't going to be done quickly. The therapist left and Danish and I spent the next 45 minutes in his room, and there was nothing I could do to bring him out of his despair. In times like this, the best thing I can do is just to bear witness and be present for him. I rubbed his back until he pushed my hand away, and I uttered prayers, hoping it would miraculously soothe him. And the kitchen rattled below me as my mother-in-law took over and finished preparing our iftar, and my husband engaged our other 2 children, and I shut the door to Danish's bedroom so they wouldn't have to hear. And I knelt by his bed, and I watched him, and I prayed. And I prayed Asar, while Danish alternated between bouts of silence and loud howling, and then I went downstairs and I got his dinner, and went back to his bedroom to help him eat between his cries because I knew he was hungry. And I had to get him fed, and get the other kids fed, before iftar time came. Eventually he stopped, and with the bribery of a Hershey's kiss from his 3-year-old brother, he eventually came downstairs while we broke our fast and prayed our evening Maghrib prayers. And at the end of Maghrib, I sat and silently uttered the prayers that I've been saying for more than 9 years. Ya Allah, please help Danish manage his autism. Please give him peace and happiness. Please help him learn a way to communicate. Please help him grow up to be independent. Please give me the strength to keep going. Ramadan is an especially trying time for Danish and me. I know about the blessings and the beauty of the month, and that our good deeds are worth 70 times more, that if our intentions are strong and good, our prayers will, God willingly, be answered. As a religion journalist, I've covered all aspects of the month. I've written prayer galleries and articles on how to achieve that spiritual connection with God. I try to go to Taraweeh, which are the nighttime prayers, when I can. Take care of my family, make my salat, try and read the Quran. And sometimes, on a very rare occasion, I get closer to achieving that feeling of true connection in prayer. But much more often, I have nights like today, and then I wonder, what will it take? How much suffering will my son have to endure, and how much longer can I take watching him go through this and not being able to do whatever I want to do for him? Will my prayers be answered the way I want them to be, and do I believe that God will grant me what I desire? So belief. That's where the trouble lies. What do I believe? And what do I believe about the power of intentions and prayer and Ramadan? On nights like this, I believe in fasting. I believe in making my 5 daily prayers. I believe in keeping it together. I don't believe that it's going to get easier, that it will get better, that my prayers will be answered. I beseech God and I get angry. And maybe because I don't believe strongly enough, this is why this continues to happen. I know this fact very well about Ramadan, that if you don't try to seek that spiritual connection, if you don't try and pray more meaningfully, if you don't thank Him for what you've been blessed with and ask for His forgiveness, and if you don't believe in His power and His will, then all you're doing is a diet. So how do I get past days like this, when it all feels like a hollow physical fast, when I'm going through the motions at prayer time, but I've got no fire in me? No meaning, no belief to even try and reach any sort of nirvana. So I'm sorry to be a downer, but I've got to be real. This is my Ramadan struggle. Many times I dig deep and remind myself of all we are to be thankful for and how blessed we are, of all that Danish can do, of all his good days, of how others had it so much worse. I remind myself that I must be grateful to God, that there are bad times, but the bad times are hard to ignore. The bad times are hanging around me, crowding me, squeezing me from every side to give in to frustration and anger and despair. But I constantly remind myself of 2 things from the Quran. So verily with difficulty there is ease. Verily with difficulty there is ease. but sometimes it isn't enough, and I hate to admit that, but there it is. And then from an oft-quoted hadith, 3 supplications shall never be rejected: the prayers of a parent for his child, the prayers of one who is fasting, and the prayers of a traveler. So I ask, why not me? Why is my simple prayer for my son that he have some peace and happiness in his life and not be granted? I am his mother. I am fasting. And yet it is pathetic and rather arrogant of me to question God's wisdom. I know, I tell myself this all the time, that God answers our prayers in ways that we don't understand, in wisdom that he only knows. But I simply cannot always understand his meaning in all that is happening. But when I see my son beating himself, wailing and crying for hours on end, when he exhausts himself to sleep to wake up and start all over again, when I see him work so hard in every aspect of his life, when I can see his frustration because I cannot understand him always, and when I, his mother, cannot ease his hardships, then the struggle overwhelms me and I question God. And I question my prayers, and I question what my fasting means. And I question why I cannot seem to give more. And I ask him this question: is he suffering because I am not good enough in God's eyes? And that is my Ramadan struggle. And that is what I wrote 7 years ago. And it was in a very difficult moment that I revealed this moment of intimacy against my better judgment. And it hurts to read that, and it brings back memories and feelings that I'd much rather leave in the past. It makes me cringe, but it is also something that I own. In writing that and in hitting the publish button and sharing it at large, there was a sense of opening the floodgates to sharing family truths about our living. And I began writing more and finding my style and my voice in sharing our family stories, struggling to find that balance in my storytelling and how I wrote about autism while respecting his privacy, the privacy of my son. And this was, and I like to point this out, this was before the neurodiversity movement became more prevalent, before we all realized that the voices that should first and foremost be centered are the ones of those with autism or those living with disabilities. I want to make clear, to detail this, that in the journey of storytelling, this has been as much about me learning my place in it as it has been about the sharing of our stories, to be open and honest of what it is like to live at the intersection of autism and Muslim living, in hopes of creating connections, being honest and chipping away at the crippling stigmas that play and still continue to play varied aspects of the communities I live in. Where I am now from where I was back then is in many ways an entirely different place. So I started writing all manners of stories about Danish's attempt to participate in a winter concert at school, about a precarious flight we took to Texas to visit his uncle, about questions that his siblings asked me. And along the way, I started to write about the lack of support we were receiving and the rare areas where American Muslim communities were stepping up for individuals with disabilities and their families. On November 17th, 2011, a couple months after I wrote that first post, 3 years before there was even the birth of an idea for various Muslim disability organizations that in recent years have begun affecting some real change in pockets of the United States, before there was any definitive effort to create inclusionary programs and support services in our masjids and Muslim communities for people with disabilities and their families, I wrote an article about what was one of the only outreach programs sponsored by Muslims for people with disabilities that I knew about. MASS DC's Eid Celebration for Special Needs Family. MASS stands for Muslim American Society, and this was about the DC chapter. So I'd like to read to you what I wrote 7 years ago from that article. And although it was written specifically to our autism experience and the experiences of those who are autistic or in an autism family, it goes for the Muslim disability community and the disability community in general. And this is what I wrote. Anyone who tries to connect that divide between raising a child, an autistic child, and adhering to faith traditions knows what a difficult task it can be. And I'm not talking about the crisis of faith, about those, what is God's plan, or why my child, will my prayers be answered, types of problems. I'm talking about the including of special needs children in faith practices and in houses of worship. Whether the child is high functioning, moderate, severe, even though all those labels don't even work really, Whether he can talk or not, whether he has behavioral issues or issues in social settings, whatever the nature of his disability is, finding a way to incorporate him in religious ceremonies or specific practices of faith, or just to be part of our faith community in any way, shape, or form, can be an exercise in frustration and futility, especially if one's house of worship does not have a plan of inclusion for special needs children, and most of ours didn't. Most of them didn't. To be sure, some religious communities are making the effort to include their special needs parishioners in their services. The examples were out there in front of us. I had been to conferences, I had talked to people, I knew churches, synagogues, other communities were doing things, but not ours. But within the Muslim community, at least in the Muslim American community, I had seen very little inclusion of special needs children and adults in the mosque. And as I've connected with more and more Muslim families with autistic children, one of our biggest sources of frustration was that we often felt like the welcome mat was not out for our children and our families. Going for salat or prayers, especially Jummah salat, which is Friday prayers in the mosque, is something I have not done with our eldest son in a long, long time. Our salat is a very exact and precise exercise in worship. We stand in straight lines, shoulder to shoulder, avoiding gaps in between. We must follow the direction of our imam and concentrate on our prayer. Any kids who get rowdy during salat usually get a reprimand. Even in the ladies' sections, where moms are more sympathetic to crying babies and fidgety kids, a child who is disruptive is not always welcome. And that was my child. He is constantly on the move, and when he is stimming, he's loud. And I've had sisters come up and give me a talking to when I tried to keep Danish with me during Friday prayers. Not to mention the tons of looks I get, and I'm sure these stories are familiar to all of you. Sometimes I try to explain what the situation is, and sometimes I find it's not worth it. Often when we go to the mosque for Friday prayers, my husband and I take turns. He prays with the congregation while I hang outside with our son, and then he comes out and I go in to pray, but then I pray alone because the congregational prayer is done. So I stopped taking Danish to Tarawih prayers during Ramadan as well. Tarawih is the nighttime prayers we do in Ramadan every night, where they recite a chapter of the Quran and the endeavors of finishing the whole recitation of the holy book in the entire month. The rush of people, the loudness of prayers being said over the microphone, it's just too much. I tried it a few times, but I met my Waterloo when after a day of fasting I broke my fast and took him into the hallway during Maghrib prayers because he was being disruptive. Or more accurately, he wasn't being disruptive, he was being Danish. And that wasn't welcome. He was so animated and active to the detriment and disgust of many of those who were at the prayer hall for iftar, Maghrib, and Tarawih prayers that I ended up going home with him. And hours later, I realized that I never prayed Maghrib at all. I fasted, but I hadn't prayed. And that was the last time I took him to a community iftar or Tarawih prayers in our masjid. I stopped making attempts to come after that as well, in any regular manner, spending most of my Ramadan nights in the years to come at home with my son, and because I would stay home, that my other younger children would stay home with me as well. Because that is what happens in our communities more often than not. If the mother is not able to go, none of the children tend to go. And that's really sad. Eid prayers can also be hit or miss. While I have successfully been able to take Danish to most Eid prayers and pray myself, because we are in a big community hall or a sports center, and I position myself in the back, on the edge, where I can keep an eye on him, I still feel the void for him. There seems to be nothing geared towards him, making him feel a part of the celebration. And I know the fault doesn't entirely lie with my mosque, or in our Muslim community. It's imperative on me to be an advocate and to introduce him to the congregation, to fight for his place there, to talk to the imam, to explain our needs. But when you fight the battles of inclusion at every turn, when you expect your mosque and your religious community to be your sanctity, you don't want to have to make the effort there. You want the effort to be made for you, by your community, and by God. And so that's something that I wrote in conjunction with my husband upon attending the Muslim American Society of Washington, D.C.'s Special Needs Eid celebration after the conclusion of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha that particular year. Danish, Amal, Hamza, and our family had never attended something like that in all our lives, an event put together by a Muslim organization catering to Muslims with all manners of disabilities, physical, cognitive, intellectual, all of it. My husband took Danish to his first special needs Eid celebration. I stayed home with our other children because one of them was sick. And it ended up being a very special occasion shared by father and son, as it was meant to be. And he wrote this for me when he came back home. And he's not a writer, he's a physician. But he also understands the power of storytelling and words, and this is what he wrote. The Zuhur prayer was certainly the highlight of the event. All the parents and children had gathered in the prayer hall after lunch. The imam gave a brief talk about the importance of salah, even for children with special needs, or maybe more importantly for children with special needs. And then he explained that even though Zuhur prayers is normally offered in silence, he would make the exception for this special Jamaat. He read aloud at every step so that the children could benefit from listening how salat is offered. To see these children stand in khayam and do sajda, which is prostrate, before Allah, their creator, was something special. They might have stood in crooked lines, with gaps in between. Their wudu or ablution might have been imperfect, but there was something about this Jamaat that really tugged at everyone's heart. So I am relating this story for a specific reason. For those of us living with disabilities or supporting, caring for, and loving someone with a disability, we know that nothing comes easily. We know that this world is not configured to automatically help us. And please pardon the use of my word, we and us, as I am not the one who lives with a disability, but my son does. And so I use the word us to refer to the Muslim disability community at large. So we know this world is not configured to automatically help and support and accommodate and include us. We know how to reconfigure the world. We know we need to work hard to fight and spread awareness and action to demand change, to facilitate change, to be the brokers of that change. We know we need to change the narrative. We demand our right to dignified, respectful, and inclusive living. We know this. We really know this. What we also know is that when you are the one who is living with a disability, or you are the family of a loved one with a disability, you have a bucket of energy that you are working with. You use this energy and you drive from that bucket to set your priorities and fight for what you need to live in this dunya, which means this world. And pray that whatever cannot be done or changed is rewarded to you in the multitude in the akhirah, which means the hereafter. So let me just draw on our family's example. We are a family of 5. My husband Daruj, myself, and our 3 children. Danish, our eldest, who is now nearly 18, Amal, our middle child, who's nearly 15, and Hamza, our youngest, who clocks in at age 10. We are a family of 7 as well. My wonderful in-laws live with me. We all live together. We also are a family of 9. My parents, who have supported us every step of the way, live a mere 2 hours away from me. Our son, Danish, nearly 18, is autistic, as I've said, nonverbal, as I've said, but certainly not non-communicative, and the best son a mother could ever hope for and pray for, more than any descriptors that I could offer to you today. Suffice it to say, it's been a long journey with him, and God willing, there are miles and miles to go. And as we say, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And as his parents, we spend an enormous amount of time in battles and negotiations, in advocacy work, in meetings, working with our local school system to fight for the best individualized education plans, or IEPs, for him year after year. Working with his classroom teachers and aides to help set the best programming up for him, the best type of education. Constantly having functional behavior plans written up and keeping copious notes to try and understand what may be triggers for him, where he's making progress, and what needs to be tweaked constantly. We have fought with our public school system when he was in public school to be placed in a top-notch private extended school year summer program. And when public school no longer worked for him, we fought and negotiated and worked with the school system to have him placed in a private school, which has made a lot of difference in his life. And even in the 6 years that he's been in private school, my attention has been honed in on nonstop on meetings with his teachers, brainstorming with them on better ways to support him, and in 2 difficult, crisis-filled years, working with them to ensure his safety and well-being as we work to figure out problems and solutions, and above all, maintain his dignity and maintain his respect. A lot of our energy and a lot of my energy from my bucket goes to this. The second portion of our energy goes to managing his medical needs, which I know you're all familiar with. He has a series of medical setbacks and issues that we are constantly puzzling through, and that's with his father being a physician himself. We have traveled up and down the country, meeting with doctors to help figure out some of Danish's medical complexities. And I am forever attuned to all of his nonverbal behaviors and indicators of different medical issues that may be afoot. A third portion of this bucket's energy goes to managing a team of caregivers who are constantly coming in and out of Danish's life. And it takes a team to help him and our whole family maintain a stable and productive life, and finding people whom I trust to do right by Danish takes a huge amount of mental wherewithal. The fourth portion of our bucket's energy goes to managing Danish's Medicaid journey and the support afforded to him through our state and federal government. This could be an entire topic by itself, as you all know, but all I want to say at this time is that it is a non-stop barrage of meetings, justifications, and battles to ensure that he receives the support he deserves over the course of his entire lifetime. So in fighting and working hard for him and with him in all four areas of his and our lives, I know that the fifth portion that unfortunately falls by the wayside is our mosque or our masjid life, or our life in the Muslim community. And this is not to say that we don't have faith in our lives. On the contrary, my trust in clinging to Allah is at times the only way to keep moving forward on this journey of ours. But what is missing, what has always been missing, is the ability to incorporate the masjid in community events apart from the communal Eid prayers in our life. And where I know that the only way to change things in our masjid, in our community, is for me to do something about it, and God knows I haven't fought in this area like I fought in others, my point is that that bucket of energy is low. And it's low after attending to these four other areas of our life, and this doesn't even consider parenting our other children and managing, a job, family, and life. So I will read to you another thing to try to emphasize this point. This was written in April of 2013. And I think in hearing these things, you will recognize stories that you might have known from your own communities maybe 2-3 decades ago. And this is where we are. Or jihad, or engaging in social and political activism, in hotly debating topics like homosexuality in Islam, equality in marriage, providing better spaces for women in our mosques. Even whether breathable nail polish is really wudu friendly, what are we doing for our Muslim families living with special needs? We are committed to owning our own narratives and taking action in many worthy areas of our lives. But what about the most vulnerable in our communities? What of their families? What about the spiritual struggles of families with disabilities? Embracing them, including them, connecting them to resources, helping them in the myriad of ways that they need help. What are we doing for Muslims who live with special needs and disabilities? Not much, and that's not acceptable for our ummah. And I wrote that 5 years ago. We live in a great country with all its flaws and problems. It is still, in my opinion, one of the best places you can live if you have a disability. You are legally granted education and supports if you have a disability, and although the process to ensure needs that are being met is a battle, to be sure, there is constant work being done to make sure businesses, events, and all areas of public life are more inclusive. Churches and synagogues and other houses of worship have been making their own strides to help their disabled congregants. Nothing is perfect by any means. It's a constant work in progress, and certainly we know that now more than ever, many of our rights are under attack. But it's still a better place than so many other places I've been. So what is missing for us, for Muslims living with disabilities and their families? Attention and care from our masjids and our mosques, our Muslim community centers, and our Muslim community events. And if there is one area of life where support and awareness should be a no-brainer, where it should be embodied as part of what our faith prescribes to us, it should be in our masjids and in our Muslim community events. And that was missing all along. And frankly, I had no energy to fight for it in my own community. Not what I had heard or saw most of the time was sincere but empty platitudes and tepid offers of support. And so I continued to do what I do best, share stories. And in doing so, I discovered two very important things. Muslim individuals living with disabilities, or Muslims caring for individuals or supporting a loved one with a disability, began reaching out to me through the blog to convey one basic message. In reading these stories, I realize now that I am not alone. I realize now that there are others out there who struggle in faith, who are angry with the lack of support in our Muslim communities, who live a life that seems alien to those who don't take the time to understand any small part of it. I felt alone, but I read your stories, and I realized that I am not. And that's a very powerful thing. And the second thing I discovered was a bonus that I never expected to happen. Folks who are not Muslim began reaching out to me through the blog to say that in reading my family stories, they came to realize how much in common they had with me and my family. That they had these ideas and perceptions, these stigmas about Muslims. And they realized that many of our struggles were the same as their struggles. It's pretty simple, but it's pretty profound. And this is what I've discovered to be the power of storytelling. The power of no longer being silent or complicit to those problems and lacks of supports that I was seeing in communities in which I reside. In the past decade, I and other Muslim disability activists and individuals have seen the tide beginning to turn in regards to making disability inclusion and disability ministry more a part of the priorities of our communities. In American Muslim communities, make no mistake, we are behind where Christian and Jewish and other faith and secular communities are in the types of ministries, programming, support systems, discussions, educational programs, and acceptance going on. We have spent years consumed by other priorities, from the simple and yet difficult act of just building mosques, to growing a political presence, to proving whether rightly or not how American we are, to making disability rights and disability and destigmatizing disabilities a priority was not there before, but it's becoming a priority now. So this is changing, slowly, but it is. Yesterday in a session on Islam and disability, I outlined a number of organizations and practical programs that are now in place to address these issues in the context of our specific communities in the pockets of this country. The work is slow, and it's happening in small areas, but there is great growth that needs to happen. But the best part is that the wheels are finally moving. What was missing before in our Muslim communities? We didn't have model programs to offer our masjids. We didn't have documents and examples outlining what is needed to make our masjids more inclusive and to support congregants with disabilities and their families. We didn't have adjusted curriculum for our Sunday schools. We didn't have support services, respite support groups where our unique issues as Muslims could be safely discussed with people who truly understood. I was at a table with a friend yesterday, and I was saying that the difficult part that I have is that I have my autism community and I have my Muslim community, and they don't intersect enough. And that's what I need. I need that to intersect. And now there are options. So there are few, and by far they do not reach all those who need these options and services, but it's a fantastic start. Now there are things available to help our communities and our masjids and community organized events learn what needs to be done to be more inclusive and supportive, to listen more and center disabled voices. And the simple act of storytelling isn't the sole catalyst for all of this movement that has been happening and continues to happen. But there is no denying that in deciding to be open and vulnerable, in deciding to be raw and honest, while protecting various privacies of my family, in deciding to share our stories despite our familial culture of being to stay quiet and keep things hidden within the confines of family and culture, this has opened up a sort of gateway for real connections and the beginning of change. Storytelling has brought me to stand in front of you on this stage today. And I am not a scholar of Islam. I'm not a scholar of disability education. I'm not an educator or one who holds multiple degrees. I have not started a ministry of any sort or revolutionized support systems in any way. Simply a practicing Muslim, a journalist by profession, a mother, and an ever-learning autism advocate and storyteller. I am someone who does not wish to be silent. I am someone who refuses to let perpetuating stigmas about disability in Muslim faith and cultural communities rule the way that my family lives. I will not do that, and I haven't done that. There is nothing extraordinary about this, but this is truly how I believe to facilitate change. And so I leave you with a quote from the Quran, which is especially meaningful to those of us in the room who are fasting or who are of the Muslim faith. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, from Surah Rahman in the 27th chapter of the Quran. Then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? Thanks. wrong audience for this. I think you know this. You probably should go to a different audience. But it's so very simple, you know, and sharing a lot of these experiences, really all it's doing is showing all that there is in common, you know, and how easy it is to find those commonalities. You know, there was a Pew Research study a while ago, you guys, well, many of you probably already are aware of it, about why there's so much negativity and suspicion towards Muslim communities, and it's a simple act of, you're not getting to know a Muslim, you're not getting to know your neighbor. Forget Muslim, Christian, Jewish, you're just not talking to people, you're not knowing your neighbor. And, you know, publishing and writing and online forums have a lot of issues and problems, but there's been a lot of good that's come out of it too.
Hello, Dilshad. Do you know of any mosques that have experimented with a lower sensory area?
Yeah, I do. So you were at the session that Sohail Pai and I did yesterday about Islam and disability, where he spoke about disability from theological standpoint in our religion, and I spoke about practical applications. So I am on the board of a fantastic organization called Muslim, which is Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs. I said that correctly. And so they have a mosque certification program where they have put together a group of qualifiers, you know, different things that they are trying to get mosques to have, from simple things like ramps and closed captioning and sensory toys and things available, low sensory rooms option. We make ablutions before we pray, so we have areas for where we do our wudu. Making those accessible. I mean, how simple is that? Making those accessible for people in wheelchairs or with other disabilities, along with programming and different things. So in this program that Muslim has developed, they have, I think, about 25 to 30 mosques across the US now, quote unquote, Muslim certified. And so they have some of these. I think the Adams Center in Northern Virginia is the closest one. I know, I could be wrong. And one of the newest certified masjids that have the things that we were discussing. So they have a low sensory area offered. They have those kind of options available if you go for Tarawih prayers. I was mentioning in the session yesterday that I got an email from Adams saying, you know, that for the first time ever they're offering exactly what you're talking about, a place for low sensory and quiet areas where you can go with your loved one, or your loved one can go during Tarawih prayers if necessary. And I was like, dude, I need to hop in my car and drive down to Northern Virginia and go there for prayers. So we do have some that are coming up now, yeah.
Thank you. That was great. I appreciate it. So you said two things, and I'm hoping you can give a bit more guidance on how to balance them. So one thing that you said was you refused to stay silent.
Yeah.
But you're also concerned about not speaking your son's story in a way that might be problematic for him or something like that. So you clearly still do talk about having a son with autism, trying to balance sort of the competing life demands that so many of us in this room know. Do you have particular sort of rules or guidelines for what you will say in talking about your family and what you won't say, a bit more details that might be helpful for some of us?
Sure. So I made two rules for myself going into this. One, I will never, ever, ever, ever talk about puberty. I will not talk about his puberty. I will not talk about his development through puberty. And we have gone through a lot. And I get private messages as well as public inquiries about that. And most of it is in the context of wanting to understand the process for someone else's child, or wanting to, help build some sort of curriculum or programming to help people go through that. Because discussing issues of puberty and sexuality in Muslim communities is also something that's really, it's hard. And it's a little more open in certain areas now, but it's generally something that's very closed. But I won't do it. Not even privately. I can speak on it in very broad, general terms, but I attended a seminar at our local Autism Society that discussed sexuality in puberty and gave various tips and suggestions. And so I'll refer to the things I learned there, but I will not discuss that. I will not discuss his medication regime, never. And I also will not discuss my marriage. That's my choice. I mean, others can, and you know, I'm sure if I wanted to, my husband's pretty open, I'm sure he'd be okay with it, but that's just something, that's just a line I draw for myself. I do not wish to discuss. I just hate that, this is me personally, you agree or don't agree, I just hate that idea of raising someone with a disability helps add to the stress of a marriage. Hey, true or not true, I just don't want to discuss that in public. That's just between him and I. So I don't discuss those things. And as my other children have grown older, they are not so much part of the storytelling anymore. All of it is with permission. I'd like that to be clear also. I made this mistake early on when they were younger to be writing, and even then I tried to be guarded about the way I wrote and what I said. And but as they got older and I learned more and discovered more and strove to understand more about what it means to self-advocate, I definitely seek their permission before publishing or including anything I write or including any photos. I generally have really gone down on the photos I include, and also I never ever publish photos of him being upset. Nothing that puts him in a negative light. I can't stand, and I apologize. I don't want to judge other people's journeys and other ways they do things, but I can't stand, folks who share videos or photos of loved ones or in moments of distress. I mean, even in forums that are meant to be private where we're seeking help from each other, sharing photos there makes me cringe. So I will not do that either. So those are some of my rules for myself.
Go ahead.
Getting back to the lower sensory area.
Yes.
I'm not sure if my question was understood or if
Okay.
I presented it properly. In the lower sensory question, I wondered if there was actually more of an adapted prayer. So that just this volume was lower and that there were more one-on-one guidance through the prayers, so that they're actually getting the spiritual development in a social context.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I misunderstood it the first time. I have heard through Muslims programming, especially through their Sunday school curriculum, which is generally where either you learn how to pray at home or you might learn in a Sunday school, that they have modified prayer protocol and programmings in place. I haven't studied it in specific to know how they modified the prayer to make it easier. I know that they have a picture schedule they work with. I know that instead of having the adhan called very loudly, it's done in a very more quieter tone. We have 5 prayers that we do a day, and like I mentioned in the piece, the afternoon prayer, Zuhud, is prayed silently. But I know that in these situations, the imam will recite it out loud so that you can follow along better. So there's different modifications that they do in teaching of this in the Sunday school curriculum that Muslim has developed. But I don't know the specifics of it right now. But we can find that out for you. Yeah.
Bill mentioned that he follows you on a blog, and I could probably just Google it, but is there some easy way to find you online? And secondly, would there be other resources that you would recommend for an understanding or a pursuit of disability within the Muslim community?
I mean, I think finding the online, I think they have the sheet in the folders with all our contact information. Right, Bill? Right, so my email's in there. And then if you Google Muslimah next door, the blog pops up. That's where 7 years of writing is archived. I am working on a book. I don't know if I'll ever publish it. I'm like forever writing it. We'll see what happens with that. And I am fairly active on Twitter and Facebook. I think my handle is Dilshad Ali on Twitter, and you can find me pretty easily on Facebook by just putting my name in there. And I have a Facebook page for the blog as well, where I share a lot of different articles and stuff about disability activism. And your second question was, what other things you can read about? I think if you look into some of these organizations, they have a lot of interesting articles and stuff. At the session yesterday, I mentioned, so Muslim was one of them. I think Global Deaf Muslims is doing a lot of interesting things for hearing impaired. ETI, Empowering Technology Integration, is doing a lot of good things for vision impaired people. It's a Muslim-led organization, but it's not geared just towards Muslims, it's towards anybody with vision impairment. The Family, Youth, and Peace Institute, they work on mental health issues. So the PowerPoint that Sahel Bhai and I did is in the Dropbox. So they're all listed there with their websites, all of them, that I mentioned yesterday in the programming. So those are all good organizations to check out and see what work they're doing. Yeah.
I have a question. So there's various ways of understanding prayers for peace for someone. In some religious traditions, that means the absence of conflict, the elimination of war, kind of the Pax Romana Greek concept. In other faith traditions, it's peace in the midst of conflict and constraints and limitations. So when you pray for your son for peace, for him to experience peace, from within your tradition, what does that actually mean?
So it's a very specific question. I think you're asking me to what specifically I would wish for him. And when I envision peace for him, I envision him having peace in his body. That he struggles with his body a lot. He struggles with his feelings of anxiety and control and just a lot of things with his body. So I pray for his peace, him having peace in his body and feeling at ease inside his own skin. So that's what I pray for when I think about peace. I pray for him having peace in his surroundings, in his home and in his environment. That, it's such a balance in the education where we're helping and we're trying to push him to learn certain things. Our collective goal is achieving as much independence as possible and having to rely as little as possible on others for supports. But in doing so, I am very cognizant of not pushing him enough that he loses that peace and he becomes overwhelmed by anxiety, which can then put him on the path for some dangerous things. So that's what I pray for when I pray for peace, that, we're making the right decisions. We're helping to push him and he's pushing himself enough, but not enough that he, crosses that line into becoming too upset and too out of whack with his own body. And I pray for his peace of mind. I don't know what's fully happening. I don't think we ever know, neurotypical or disabled, that we know what's happening in another person's mind. So I just want, and that's the same prayer I have for my other children. I pray that they all have peace of mind. That they have confidence and peace of mind and that they feel strong in who they are and comforted and respected by who's around them.
I appreciate earlier that you talked about your perspective as the parent and not feeling welcome in the mosque and your services. So that resonates clearly in any faith community, and I think it's an area we can all work toward. Is what would be particular recommendations for how, and I think it's in the how that we get lost. How do we help a parent who we might not yet have the wherewithal yet to include better, but how do we help with respite? How do we help with comfort? How do we help with support? How can we start that journey with one another?
I found for me that how is often couched in very symptomatic terms, which by saying that it means that we don't have to overcomplicate things. So what works for me and for what I've seen of other people who are living similar lives is in the simple act of asking questions, with respect. So I have friends who don't quite understand all aspects of what goes on in our lives, but they know how to ask the right questions and they know how to offer themselves even when I can't accept their offers. So, There was a particular time a couple years ago we went to eat prayers, and we came out of prayers and it's very crowded. And we're at the Richmond Convention Center, sorry. And you know, they have a couple doors you can come out of. It's very crowded, and we come out of there. I had Danish in his stroller to be able to navigate better. I have my mother-in-law, she's in a walker, and we have to get the cars. And so my husband leaves to get the cars, and some kids are going in this direction, and some people are going in this direction, and he gets upset. And he comes out of his stroller, and he's on the ground, and he's upset. And so, the friends who came up to me and just said, you know, how can we help? How about we just kind of stand in front of you and shield you a little bit? And I like the way you can help us to go find my husband. There's really nothing much you can do. If you can go and find out where he is and get him here, that's going to help me. So the how, I think it starts in asking questions. And then the how, I think, continues in persisting in asking questions. Because I think a lot of times we will ask, you know, how can I help? And then the standard answer is, no, I'm fine. And then life goes on, but no, you're not really fine. And sometimes you need to be asked over and over and over again in different manners, you know? Sometimes you just need to show up. Sometimes for me, just the act of knowing that someone was thinking about us was enough. A text message over WhatsApp, you know, just late in the middle of the night, I was thinking about you, how are things going? It's really all I need, you know, or it's all that we all need. So I think the how comes in the asking of the questions, and then the persistence of asking those questions, and then following up on what they say, and trying to read between the lines, I think.
Thank you so much for a very important element of you and your son and your family. I feel, you know, as a fellow Muslim sister, and the importance of sharing stories is something that is rare in our community. Curious if you could react or comment on, you know, what steps have you taken to share these elements of what you've shared with us today in the Muslim community, and what kind of response you've gotten, or have you been able to share the depths outside of your blog with the community in the way that you just shared with us today?
Most of my sharing, as will happen now, and the way things are set up now, is done. Well, there's the blog and the writing, but then it's through social media outreach. And I think a lot of us, or a lot of people in this room, can understand that sometimes the living can be isolating. And so the social media outlets can be really helpful to continue and maintain connections with other people. And so I don't just write and post stories, but I will share snippets of things in various social media platforms. I don't get out that much because my priority is the family and my children and a job and everything. And even though we have a wonderful group of people around us who come in and help support and help do caregiving for Danish and different things like that, I don't like to be away that much at all. I guess I'm a little bit of a micromanager. And she doesn't really like, but there it is. And so I use social media. I use social media a lot to make those connections, and I have found just through that, and you can understand this, Rushi, there's still a lot of godly aspects of, when I say Muslim communities, I'm talking about across Muslim Arab communities, Muslim South Asian communities, Muslim different of African, Somalian communities, you know, Muslim Pakistani communities, Muslim Indonesian communities, you know. The idea of sharing stories, you know, being open about the kind of living that we do is pretty rare still. And so often what happens is people will reach out to me who read something I wrote or heard of something I wrote through somebody. So that's how it tends to happen. You know, I write, I share, I post. Sometimes I show up at these things. And then just things kind of snowball.
So just a follow-up question, if I may. what do you think the Muslim community needs to do to step up in regard to embracing these very important elements of our lives, which is living with disability for many of us?
Right. Sorry, the question was?
So, how can, in terms of the Muslim community, in terms of stepping forward in the direction of what we would hope to see the Muslim community come forward versus stories and our individuals' elements of engagement around disability. What does the Muslim community need to do to step up in regard to embracing the aspects of universal?
I think the path forward there lies in a couple steps. I think one of those steps is continuing to make those inroads and relationships with leaders in our different communities, at organizational level, at the masjid level, in local masjid communities, and in bigger cities, making, kind of being that buzzing in their ear all the time about this is what our needs are, because I do understand that, when I reach out to my mosque over here, they're like, well, nobody really said that we needed this. Whereas I know of 10 families who have reached out to me, behind closed doors saying, God, I wish our masjid would do that. And I'm like, well, God, say something, It's gonna happen if you don't say something, If I'm the only one who keeps saying something, they're not gonna facilitate a lot of change for one family. They should. Every family should count, but that's just not how it works. So I think, first of all, reaching, being a buzzer in the ear of those in leadership positions. I think supporting some of the different organizations that are working from the ground up now in their work, all the wonderful different programs and institutional things that are happening from out of this room, and showing our support there. We need to do the same thing with the different growing organizations and institutions that are starting to approach this in our communities as well. They're doing the hard work, some dynamic individual or group of individuals have to step up and start it. And there are those who have done that. And so we need to get behind them and, keep pushing them forward, keep sharing their platforms as well. A couple things like that.
Got a question back here.
I think,
So, thank you very much for this fascinating story. And I think that it's really important as maybe disabled people in some other countries, Indonesian or African countries, thinking what a difficulty that a disabled American can face. They have kind of reasonable accommodations, and they have sort of lots of support, and what difficulty that they are facing. So doing that, this story and sharing that blog will definitely kind of elaborating at this point. I wonder if you thought of leading a group of women's circles or mothers' circles who are disabled children, parents. They could share their stories, and that would be connected with a group of civil communities who are working in this field. So people can have a kind of either collective blogs or videos or brochures sharing lots of stories. So the communities, and that would be even communicated with countries outside USA. This then could send lots of stories and ideas to other people, and then you will share global challenges, and then people can learn from each other. Because what you're doing is, as you said, is rarely found in many other countries. Instead of in relation to stigma, and families don't want to share their siblings or sons and daughters' stories because they are ashamed from their impairments in a way. Thanks.
I think you have put forward a great idea, and I'll follow you. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I know of different online groups and communities that are starting to do this in the UK, and I've seen some out of Malaysia and Indonesia out there. You are correct. I've not seen any type of global network kind of connecting these communities under the umbrella of storytelling, which is a powerful method of breaking through these stigmas. So it's a fantastic idea. I will follow you. Go ahead, lead it.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. It really, I think, speaks speaks again to the power of personal experience. I serve as a hospital chaplain in a multi-faith environment. One of the things that I was curious about, I understand and I certainly respect your reticence to discuss your son's medical history, but I wonder, are there things that you could share that for those of us in either a clinic or an inpatient setting, things that would be important for us to know to provide good care for him and for you or families in a similar situation? I can see where being an autism-affected family as well as a family of Muslim faith might in some sense feel as if you were being doubly an outsider.
Yeah.
And so how can we best be of support and inclusive there?
I think if you're working in a type of a clinical or inpatient setting and you do have families and people who come across to you from different faith communities, some basic understanding of what some of the parameters of that faith community will be is a good place to start. So anytime we have had to be in a hospital setting or anything like that, we have dietary needs that we adhere to, and we adhere to them for Danish as well. That being said, I am more willing to bend the rules for him in certain situations, because he has a certain number of things that he will eat. And there's a certain number of things he will not eat. He has sensory issues of what he can tolerate and what he can't tolerate. And if I can't find what works for him that adheres to our dietary restrictions, I'm going to bend the rules. Pretty sure God is merciful and forgiving, and I'm going to bend the rules. So I think, inquiring about those kind of things, like we would do for, in any type of medical situation where you ask, are you allowed to have blood products, and are you allowed to, do this and do that? I think asking about that is also good. Sometimes one of my friends, who's the executive director of Muslim, she has a daughter on the spectrum. And so, and I'm not going to share any intimate details about her, but I would imagine, my friend, she wears the headscarf, her other daughters wear the headscarf. Her daughter, who is autistic, sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. So I would imagine if they were in a type of situation like this, you might want to inquire, are you comfortable with a male physician or a male clinician? Are you comfortable? Do you need to be covered? Or, just kind of being cognizant of those things and asking or letting them lead the way into what is comfortable for them in that type of situation would be helpful. I would say probably things like that. And that would go for any of the faith community. I know there are certain parameters that people from the Jewish faith might want to follow, or from the Christian faith might want, or the Hinduism, Sikhism, any faith, might want to follow. So I think being cognizant of some of those things and trying to respect those when someone is inpatient or coming in is a great thing to start with. Or being, more than anything, being open to folks bringing in their own food. That's been the biggest thing for me. Seeking permission to bring our own food wherever we go.